Celebrating what today's DAR is doing to contribute to the strength of our nation, it is appropriate that we now take a step back and reflect on the stories of our ancestors and how they helped to build this great nation of ours. We are privileged tonight to be welcoming exceptional storytellers to our stage who help bring history alive for us and for all Americans. Tonight, I am honored to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Alexander Rose, an expert on military and intelligence history whose collective body of work brings history to life for modern audiences. His book, Washington Spies, the story of America's first spy ring, serves as the basis for the AMC television series Turn. Both the book and the series, for which Alex serves as historical consultant, focus on the Culper Ring, a network of spies that operated in New York and Connecticut during the Revolutionary War. Through his exceptional storytelling, Alex sheds light on the ordinary people who did extraordinary things to help secure American independence. These early intelligence agents delivered information about British battle plans and military strategies to George Washington. Alex's research drew upon the Library of Congress's collection of correspondence between Washington and members of the Culper Ring. This priceless trove of historical records proved Washington to be not only the father of our country, but also the father of American espionage. Washington's spies and turns represent only part of his impressive body of work. He was born in the United States and spent time living in Australia, Britain, and Canada before returning to the United States. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the CIA Journal Studies and Intelligence, and the Daily Telegraph, among other publications. In addition to military and intelligence history, Alex also writes about topics such as technology and firearms. Alex is the author of American Rifle, a biography, and Kings in the North, the House of Percy in British history, and has just finished his new book, Men of War, The American Soldier in Combat from Bunker Hill to Iwo Jima. It's due to be published next spring. I look forward to reading this latest work to see how Alex uses his remarkable writing talent to reveal new historical insights uncovered through diligent research. It is a pleasure to welcome Alexander Rose. Mr. Rose.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Madam President General. Sorry about that. You're very confused there. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's one of those times, actually, I wish my parents were in the audience, in the sense that my father, after hearing all of that, would have been very, very proud. But my mother would actually have believed it. For the moment, let me start by asking you a question. What do you think of when you think of George Washington? What image do you conjure up? For me, he's a fairly starchy, stiff, older gentleman, respectable, upright, and unyieldingly honest. This is probably because I'm harking to a well-known picture in my head. I'm referring, of course, to the face that we see every time we leave a tip, obviously not a very big one, buy a cup of coffee, obviously a very cheap one, or make change. It's printed on every single dollar bill. But what if I told you that $1 George was actually a world-class spy master who positively enjoyed spying the daylights out of the British? Not only could he tell a lie, but he told a great many of them, and he relished each and every one. That's a very different George Washington than the one we're used to, and that's the image I'd like you to picture this evening as I tell you a little about the Culper Ring and our AMC show Turn. I originally began investigating the secret world of the American Revolution when I was reading a biography, and I'm going to just cue up the boos and hisses right now, of Benedict Arnold, of whom you may have heard. I, of course, knew him as a traitor of the darkest dye, but I did begin to wonder. Arnold, whatever his other faults, didn't start as a traitor. He became one. Before he ever turned his coat, he was a spy. And moreover, he never worked alone. Someone always ran him. In other words, he was part of a system, an established espionage system. Now that realization piqued my writer's curiosity as well as my agent's, more importantly, and I began to dig deeper. What was this system, and who were its dark warriors? And to answer that question, I began my long odyssey into the shadow war of spy versus spy. Now, the thing with history books is that they're like TV shows, just with more words, and as Barry Josephson here, the producer of Turn, can attest, a great deal cheaper. They too need strong characters, rapid pacing, and a rattling, rousing story. So that immediately raised the question, whose story should I tell? It took me quite a while, but eventually I found my perfect spies to write about, the Culper Ring. Now, what is the Culper Ring? Well, some of you already know the answer, especially if you've been watching our show. But for those who don't, let me summarize very quickly who they were, what they did, and how it all worked. In a nutshell, the Culper Ring was George Washington's own private spy network. It operated for most of the war in New York, Connecticut, and Long Island, and can be counted as one of the most successful, yet most secretive, intelligence networks in American history. Indeed, it's only been in the last several decades that we've finally managed to uncover or reveal the identities of all its members. So who were they? The Rock of the Culpers. By the way, Culper was a kind of an alias they adopted. That's C-U-L-P-E-R. The Rock of the Culpers was Benjamin Talmadge, quite a well-known soldier, a high-minded dragoon who served as the Ring's case officer in Connecticut and reported directly to Washington. Robert Townsend was one of his main spies, and I don't think, we haven't seen him yet in the show, but I don't think I'm revealing any spoilers in saying that I very much hope and expect that we'll be seeing him in the future. I'll put you on notice, Barry. He was based in New York, at the time London's Rome of the New World, where he would pick up army gossip and naval news and arrange to meet Austin Roe at his house or store in the city. Roe would pick up Townsend's letter and ride the 55 miles to the little town of Setauket on the north shore of Long Island. There, Roe would dead drop the package for Abraham Woodhull to pick up. Woodhull would then go home to his farmhouse and compose a lengthy report using invisible ink or a secret cipher for Washington's eyes only. It contained everything that Townsend and Roe had told him, plus his own observations as to what was going on around him. Woodhull would then signal Caleb Brewster, a rough-hewn whaleboatman and something of a rascal, to say the least. Brewster would beach his whaleboat late on a moonless night, get the package, and sail across Long Island Sound, at the time more colorfully known as the Devil's Belt, to dock in Connecticut. Once there, he'd usually pass the material to Talmadge. The letters would then be raced through Connecticut, north to Washington's headquarters on the Hudson. It was an amazing achievement, all in all. So what were the secrets behind the Culper Ring's success? First, they had a trump card in the form of Abraham Woodhull, played by Jamie Bell in the show. Initially the unlikeliest of spies, he would emerge as the real linchpin of the operation. Without him, the Ring quite literally could not have functioned. It was he who connected Townsend and Roe on the one side to the other half of the system, represented by Talmadge and Brewster. Take Woodhull away, in other words, and Washington would have ended up with a network of two halves, not a whole. Second, all of the Culper spies, apart from Townsend, came from the village of Setauket and had known each other since childhood. That close bonding was key to their success. Answering only to Washington, they were one-man dogs who refused to work with anyone they didn't know. And as a result, the British found it impossible to blow the network by riddling it with doubles and informers, which was the usual way of doing these things. There's one more thing, the third thing, that makes the Culper Ring special. I mentioned before that it took me a long time to find the perfect spies to write about. The reason it took so long is that spies are not generally in the habit of keeping incriminating evidence lying around. After all, if they're caught with a secret letter or a coded message, it's going to be a very quick trip to the local scaffold. In other words, it's very hard to write a book about spies precisely because spies don't wish to have books like mine written about them. That certainly would have been the case with the Culper Ring, barring one single unique difference, and that is, owing solely to good fortune, we possess an almost complete record of their intimate correspondence with George Washington. From its creation until the very day of its dissolution, there is a detailed record of the Culper Ring's activities, travails, and triumphs. Together, these letters, there's about 150 of them, comprise a remarkable resource. From them, it emerges that for the good and faithful servants of the Culper Ring, Washington was their confessor, their summoner, their almoner. As father figure, he chided them, praised them, coached them, and set them right when they erred. And when they felt their energy or courage failing them, it was to him they turned to refresh their flagging spirits. Speaking of the Culpers, there's yet another world revealed in their long series of letters. I'm referring to that of the ordinary men and women who lived through the War of Independence. Because we all know how history turned out, we naturally tend to think of the Revolution as an inevitable victory for the American side, a triumph predestined from the moment that famous shot at Lexington and Concord was heard around the world. But it wasn't. To those actually living at the time, it was touch and go, and nobody knew who was going to win. For every victory like Trenton, there was a loss like Germantown. And had the British been more resolute, or the French less, things might well have turned out very differently. It is Tern's focus on the regular folks that distinguishes it from any other television show, or recent television show or movie about the Revolutionary War. See, most of the time you see dramas and documentaries and history books take the big picture approach. They tell stories of great generals and stern statesmen and far-seeing philosophers. It's history from on high, a bird's view. Well, that's all well and good, but what I set out to do when I wrote Washington Spies, and what Barry and Craig Silverstein, the showrunner for Tern, did when they were making the show, was to seek out the worm's eye view and to ask the rather modest question, who else won the war? True, we spend some time with George Washington, marvelously played by Ian Khan. He's very well worth watching. And yes, there are some wonderfully sinister villains and spy gadgets and more twists and turns than you can shake a stick at. But the real heart of the show centers on ordinary people living their lives in an obscure fishing village no one's ever heard of. The show examines the gritty reality of everyday life under wartime occupation and highlights the kind of hard choices and painful dilemmas that confront those who just need to get by day. Now, of course, we'd all like to think that facing similar trials, we'd make the right choice. But Tern forces you to ask, is that choice really as black and white as we believe or want to believe? Let's have a little think. Like so many other places, Setauket was an overwhelmingly loyalist town in a very small world. A person who backed the rebels or signed a petition or provided aid and succor for the Bluecoats, let alone signed up for military service, was running a very great risk. He or she would have to deal with bitter family disagreements, social ostracism, humiliation and slights, and the loss of one's livelihood. At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, is sacrificing your own family, your children's happiness, and everything you've achieved worth throwing in your lot with George Washington and his untried Continental Army for what was, at the time, a very risky political experiment? Would you? Now, clearly, since everybody in this vast and colossal auditorium is a daughter of the American Revolution, that means that at least one of your kin did just that. It took him a long time to get there, but ultimately he realized that sometimes you have to fight for what you stand for. And the very fact of Woodhull's reluctance, his anxiety over his fate, his indecision about what to do, marks him out what used to be known quaintly as an everyman. In other words, a normal person. In that sense, there's really nothing that distinguishes him from the crowd. Not all of us can be lantern-jawed superheroes, and not everyone gets to be James Bond or Jason Bourne. Courage, like true grit, can come in many forms. Like Talmadge and Caleb and Townsend, Abraham Woodhull was an ordinary individual who, like all of us here, made mistakes and did the best he could under difficult circumstances. And yet they all the Culpers, surmounted these challenges for the sake of their ideals. In other words, the Culpers, because they're frail, because they're flawed, because they're fearful, continue to come across, despite the passage of, 230 odd years, they come across as sympathetic, real people. And that's the real story here. The same goes for your ancestors who served the Continental cause in whatever capacity. They too were ordinary men and women who, like the Culpers, heard the trumpet's silver sound and performed extraordinary deeds of resistance and sacrifice. Maybe their names aren't household ones. Maybe they're not in the history books. But without their contribution, there would be no United States of America. The Daughters of the American Revolution, I don't think I have to tell anyone here, was formed in 1890 to protect and burnish precisely that legacy. The earliest daughters performed signal service to help reconcile the past with the present, to revivify the ideals and morals that had animated the founders, in order to guide Americans, new and old alike, of myriad creeds and faiths, down the path of greatness and unity. And this is a task, so I've come to see, that you continue today. And for assuming that burden so selflessly, I'd like to end my talk with a heartfelt thank you from myself, Barry Josephson, Craig Silverstein, everyone at AMC, all the actors and the entire production crew for Turn. At the end of the day, all we do is make TV shows and write books. Our job is to entertain and very occasionally, just very occasionally, enlighten you. But it is you who willingly shoulders the responsibility to educate and, just as importantly, to edify today's Americans and those of generations to come by promoting patriotism, volunteering 4.7 million hours, millions of hours in your local communities, and preserving our common history. And for all this, we salute you, and we are immensely proud that you've thought fit to bestow upon us tonight's award. We will treasure it. It's probably going to go in the writer's room or on Barry's mantelpiece, whoever gets first dibs on it. But really, we don't deserve it anywhere near as much as you all do, or for that matter, your ancestors, for everything that they did. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, and thank you for rewarding us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for helping to tell the stories of our ancestors who helped secure our nation's independence. It is such a treat to have an expert in Revolutionary War espionage share his knowledge with an audience that is passionate about American history. Please accept this certificate on behalf of our society to thank you for informing and entertaining our audience at the opening night ceremony of the 123rd Continental Congress.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Alexander Rose helped bring the story of the Culper Ring to the page, and now we are so pleased to welcome those who have brought the story to the small screen. Wilhelmina Kelly, National Chair, Public Relations and Media Committee, will present the DAR Media and Entertainment Award. Ms. Kelly.
Madam President General, it is a pleasure to be here tonight at this wonderful gathering to recognize an outstanding creative force in the field of media and entertainment. We, as Americans, are blessed with the resources, technical skills, and artistic freedoms to tell the stories and share the programs that ultimately educate, inspire, and expand the general knowledge of our country's values, culture, and history. I think we all agree that an enlightened citizenry is vital to the preservation of the rights we enjoy today under our U.S. Constitution. Our own national society recognizes that importance and celebrates the power of history well told with our annual DAR Media and Entertainment Award. Introduced more than 40 years ago, Daughters have worked to recognize programming that supports the National Society's cornerstones of historic preservation, education, and patriotism through this nationwide awards contest. This year, DAR is pleased to recognize the dramatic TV thriller Turn, which was nominated by the Judge Lynn chapter in Washington, D.C. Produced by AMC and based upon the book Washington's Spies by Alexander Rose, the series dramatically casts light on the untold story of America's first spy ring, which operated behind enemy lines in British-occupied Long Island. Unique in its Revolutionary War setting, few television programs today focus on this critical period in our nation's history, and fewer still can successfully capture and hold the viewing audience in as compelling a manner. I'm delighted to be able to inform you that just this week, AMC announced that Turn will be renewed for a second season. Madam President General, it is an honor to present the 2014 National DAR Media and Entertainment Award to AMC for the outstanding dramatic series Turn. Accepting on behalf of Turn, Barry Josephson, Executive Producer.
Thank you so much. Please. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a behind-the-scenes producer, so I don't have the opportunity to speak publicly like this very often, so please bear with me. I know one thing for certain. I owe a great debt of gratitude to Alex for writing the book that the show is based on, but I will never follow him again. Ever. Thank you, Ms. Kelly, and thank you, Madam President General. Thank you, DAR. Over the past couple of days, my wife and I have been here. We've been staying at the Hyatt with you, amongst you. I wish only that I had the lineage and the gender to join you. But I don't. But I certainly can support you, and we do. And I've learned quite a bit about the DAR, which I want to talk about as briefly as I can, but I do want to say thank you to the AMC channel for airing our show and supporting our show. Craig Silverstein, who is my partner in the creative endeavor, who wrote and created it based on Alex's book. I basically put them together and sent them off into the woods, and they did a great job. My wife, who's here tonight, Brooke, brilliant, because I would read Alex's book night after night. I had always wanted to do a story based on American history, having been fascinated with it from elementary school on to when I attended the American University here as a poli-sci student. And I would talk about the book, and I would talk about the spies, and I would talk about the fact that the story had never been told. And my wife finally said to me one night, "Produce the show." So I guess the theme here for me is that there's a great woman in front of and behind and to the side and everywhere. In 1900, shortly after the establishment by Georgia, the Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR there, they made an effort to acquire Meadow Garden, which is a post-revolutionary war home, and was, of George Walton, one of the three signers of the Declaration of Independence. And in 1901, the DIR succeeded in getting that house, which was licensed beside the Augusta Canal, making it into a museum. and that continues in operation today. The Walton House became the first to preserve a house as a notable, historical, significant preserved home museum in the country. That's remarkable. Pardon me as I struggle to read with or without my glasses. I haven't figured out which yet. But it brings me to an important and significant moment in my life, which was the first preserved home that I'd ever seen was in Van Cortlandt Park, which I was playing football in when I was a kid. And it was the first time I'd seen this home, the Van Cortlandt home, which was a house built in 1748. And during the Revolutionary War, George Washington stayed there, as well as British General Howe, who used it as a mainstay behind, to do operations out of. And it was remarkable because that became the city's first historic house museum as well. And it's the first historical building I remember seeing. What's remarkable about that, when you look around the country, and I have scouted everywhere, I've made movies and television shows in almost every state, and you operate with 177,000 members, I believe, in 50 states, and whether it's the McDowell House in Danville, Kentucky, or the Quaker Flour Mill in Pueblo, Colorado, or the Palace of Governors, all of these are homes that I have seen and that have been restored, and it's just remarkable. And you have to recognize that this preservation work that you do is so beneficial for us, because in these 50 states, we're here tonight because of the efforts that you make experiencing and rebuilding and making sure these buildings stand for something, because with that rich history, those who visit those homes are moved. And importantly for us, in filming in those homes, for those who can never visit, the American heritage comes right into their homes, across America, across the country, and across the world. Without that preservation work, and without the work that you do, nobody would have that opportunity. So the DAR's mission of restoring and maintaining, locating and restoring and making Revolutionary War patriot grave sites important and headstones. Somebody mentioned to me at the hotel about how they'd been to Setauket, and they didn't think that some of the gravestones of Anna Strong and Caleb Brewster were properly maintained, so they're now going to make sure that they do that. And I can assure you that will get done. And the reason why I know that is because in 1900 in Georgia, when the history book that I read said made an effort to, that was beyond making an effort to. That was, we are going to do this, and you do, and you all do it so well. We would be in the blind completely when we go out to scout, and the people who work on the show turn, who do such a magnificent job. For example, Donna Sikowska, who is our wardrobe and costume designer. If you look at the wardrobe and the costumes in the show, they are as authentic as were worn and used in the period. And Caroline Hanina, who does all of our brilliant work recreating these buildings and structures and their interiors and the cloth and the wood that they're made of. She would have nothing to go by were she not able to tour the homes that still exist that you have helped preserve. So our humble show really would not have that ability without the work that you do. So it is remarkable. I want to thank you, and I want to thank you all for this award because it's so important to us in what we do. And there would be no way to do it because there wouldn't be the preserved documents, there wouldn't be the preserved buildings, there wouldn't be all the things that you do so well. As a matter of fact, in all of Alex's research that he did, it's just so fortunate that some of these things were preserved so well. I really want to thank you. I want to thank you again for this award. And I do want to say that your motto, God, home, and country, is what's most important for everybody to recognize how important this country is, how important the origins are, and how important it is the work that you all do. I really thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry. After thoroughly enjoying each episode of Turn, I am delighted that this exceptional series will be back for a second season. And we are also grateful that Barry's wife, Brooke, who is seated in the President General's box, was wise enough to advise him to produce this series.